let's get started. I think one thing that I'd like our viewers to catch us on, if in case we drift into it, is we're really here to just talk about heroism. I'm not interested in talking about fundamentalist religion or politics or gun licenses or the failure of the Secret Service or any of that. Not the Secret Service, although that's probably failing as well. The intelligence services. We're not here to deconstruct the events from last weekend, right?
Sure. I mean, yeah, you're talking to a political scientist, so I'll do my
Yes.
best, but I make no
Right.
promises.
Right. We can have that discussion elsewhere. I think this obviously hit close to home, geographically and culturally. And I think until we spoke to CNN yesterday, I think I spoke to them 24 hours ago exactly. I hadn't really got to a point where I wanted to say anything about it. I think I hadn't posted anything online. But in talking to someone in Atlanta, it sort of came out as it would for any other situation, I suppose. So it just kicked into all the stuff we've talked about for so many years. And so thought we should probably talk about this because, well, we've been contacted by press in other countries. No one in Australia has reached out yet. So, and actually, I haven't seen any Australian news about heroism. Certainly, some pieces on the heroes and the heroic acts, but no deeper dive, which at this stage is also not very surprising from what we've seen over the years as well. So I think that's where I start. I suppose I watched a YouTube video this morning, perhaps ill-advisedly, by an Australian content creator who was paying tribute to the victims and the heroes, and I shed some tears this morning, like half an hour ago. So it's been. I thought I was fine yesterday, and then it's like, oh man, no, this is still pretty close. And I think there's definitely some real cultural parts to that. I think one of the things that I kept hearing, even as things were unfolding, was this doesn't happen in Australia. And then you had all the smartasses in those threads saying, well, yes, it does because it's happening. But I think, and we can get into this as well, but a lot of the people in interviews really expressed this sense of national pride, I suppose, in Australia as a fairly multicultural place, and as a place where people help each other, and et cetera, et cetera. And, obviously that's not 100% true for any country, but there is a cultural identity piece there that even a Syrian immigrant was chanted Aussie, Aussie, Aussie from his bed yesterday or the day before. So, and he was really expressing, this is the greatest country on earth, and this is not the Australian way, and Australians help each other. So, yeah, I think that's it. I think because it was so shockingly unusual here, it's felt very different.
Well, that's a good way to begin. I, I mean, there's a number of things that stand out to me. The first, of course, is that sitting where I sit in the U.S., this is not shocking. This is, I mean, I hate to say, but very much run of the mill. And we are inundated with news about mass shootings, and even, I mean, even and just to say for the Jewish community in the United States, this is also not something that is such a shock. I mean, of course, it's shocking, but it's not that many years ago that we had the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh. followed 6 months later by the shooting in Poway, California. And so, um, you know, this idea of vigilance and security at all sorts of events is front of mind for the Jewish community. Um, to to see this happening in other parts of the world is horrific, and it's certainly not something that we become accustomed to, but it's something that, as I mean, it sounds so awful. We are not surprised by,
Yeah.
um, whether as Americans or as Jews. The idea of someone walking into, a place where young people, old people are gathered in celebration and just starting to open fire on them. I mean, well, again, I'm probably showing my age, but growing up, that was to me unimaginable. This was not something that was part um, of my life growing up in the United States, in Canada, in the Jewish communities there, um, and so the way that things have shifted over the past couple of decades. Um, it's horrific, and it's and in some ways it's really horrific the way we've become accustomed to it, to this terrible drumbeat of violence. Um, I mean, the first before we get into talking about the heroic actions of people in Australia, which I think is really what we're here to do. I mean, obviously, the first thing that has to be said is that more than a dozen Jewish people lost their lives, and they were gathered on the first day of Hanukkah to celebrate. And as much as we don't want to get into the politics of this, there is really no good way to make sense of the behavior that targets innocent people as a matter of course now because of their religious beliefs. And so um, uh, it sounds trite, and I can't think of any other way to express it, but the unimaginable pain and horror of the Jewish community in particular in Australia, that it kind of weighs very heavily on me. I know that there are a lot of people there who who are absolutely um, jarred by this, right? The way that they are thinking about their community is now going to be totally different, and then uh, that in itself is well, I mean, ultimately that's part of the purpose of terrorism, right, is to continue not simply to terrorize people in the moment, but to continue to terrorize them as a result of these actions. So my heart goes out to all of those people, and truthfully to the Jewish community worldwide, who in so many places where I've been, and including where I am, there is this horrific kind of siege mentality that is now in some ways part and parcel of being part of this this religious community, which was unimaginable to me years ago, and it has now become part of a daily life.
Yeah, and I think that there's a couple of things from that I want to move into, and one is that obviously Bondi Beach is a massive place, and it wasn't just a Hanukkah party, and I think that's one of the elements of the shockwave here as well, is that if you're not from here or if you haven't been to Bondi, it's an iconic location. It's where all the tourists to Sydney go, either before the before the bridge and the Opera House, or right after. Um, and so, in the immediate aftermath, all the TV interviews, um, I think I saw 10 people speaking to the camera without Australian accents before there was an Australian accent. It's a very international location, and but also people live there and go there every morning to swim as part of their general life, and walk across that bridge, or um, so there's a lot of trauma that's going on continue for local residents, for travelers who are going home. Um, the other thing is the at that same time, I think there was a manhunt on for the Brown University shooter, and I think you mentioned that sort of getting used to these kinds of things as a society. I wonder the and we can get into the heroism part here, is the training or preparation for an event like this that happens because in the US you're exposed to these stories often, so the heroic imagination kicks in, and you might say, what would I have done, or what could I have done, things like that. Whereas in Australia, that's just not generally happening. We see the big events in the US, but there was a large number of people who, um, quote unquote, ran towards the danger. I saw one person on a thread, and you take the credibility as much as you want from this person, but they said they had studied mass shootings, and um, immediately saw way more action in this thing than typically happens. So I wonder, what happens to a psyche in preparation for an event like this in a place where it's happening so often, and in elementary school and high school, you're trained um, for this. Are people running away first because that's what's taught so often in the US? Like, and self preservation is very important. Um, I wonder if that's, I probably don't wonder. I'm sure that affects the general reaction. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that as far as I know, is not being studied, but it's probably an important thing to look into, and that is what the results are after now living, in a place where this sort of thing happens with. With a kind of absolute regularity, and whereas you say, like, the training is run, hide, fight. I think that there's a good reason, of course, that that's the training, um, and so um, I wouldn't be surprised to find that. I mean, if that's what people are hearing, as they should be, then that's what people are doing. And I mean, we saw a number of instances here in the Sydney case, where that's not what people did. Um, and I think that that's probably not the standard thing that people are hearing all the time in Australia. It is absolutely the thing that people are hearing all the time here in the United States, and that may account for some of the difference, where you had people whose first inclination was to fight the people who had guns, um, and that is a very different approach. It is, of course, not the one that is being recommended, and so, um, yeah, I'd be interested to find out if anybody's studying kind of what the results are in the U.S. in particular. Um, I don't know. Again, like, this is it can only be speculative, but given the frequency, or at least what seems to me to be the frequency of mass shootings in this country, um, uh, it's hard to say if the body counts are higher or lower based on the advice to run or to hide. It's hard to prove one way or the other that it would have been worse, or whatever the case might be. So
Yeah,
nonetheless, that's where we find ourselves.
and Brian and Suzanne have just confirmed that is the current training to to run, then hide, then fight. Um, a number of people, both journalists, politicians, and people in the population have expressed that idea that first couple who were killed, who intervened, saved lives, that they paused it, they alerted more people because there were gunshots before the targeted gunshots, I suppose, but also possibly rattled one of the guys as well. Put them off their plan, and then all the way down the line, everyone who intervened saved lives by numerous methods, whether it was drawing attention or stripping a gun or whatever it might have been. So yeah, I think yeah, you're exactly right. That's are there more lives saved by people dying in the act of helping? But it comes down to these individual choices that we've been studying for so long, right? That there is some moral code in there, and I think a lot of people in their post interviews here have expressed that there was no doubt that they had to step in, and I think that was especially true of the Jewish population there because of the reason that they were there. They were reminded of helping and community and togetherness. So I guess the very first image that we received was of Ahmed, who, that footage was minutes after we found out that it even happened. So it was so iconic. I mean, it was people gravitated to that straight away because it was an everyday person stepping up and not carelessly. Like, you could see that he was very deliberate about his actions. He wrapped his arms around him, stripped the gun. It seemed very practiced. And with the speculation that was coming out minute by minute, there was, he must have been a police officer, or then no, he was definitely a civilian. And so I think my first reaction was, what next? Like, what would I have done next? And there's so many experts online who criticize him for not shooting the shooter, who perhaps played too many video games or owned too many guns themselves. But when you saw that, I guess what time it was, you would have woken up to this news, I guess, right?
I can't remember at this point, but probably.
Yeah. It was evening here. So what was your reaction when you saw that? And welcome, Harold, to the show.
Yeah. Exactly as you say, right? This, the first thing that struck me was the incredible courage and the number of lives that were undoubtedly saved by this person. Not knowing anything about him, his background, anything at all. But then, of course, once you get past that, then the heroism researcher in me thinks to myself, I really wonder what his background is. um, what kind of training he had, because just as you said, Matt, the way that he approached this, it was not a person who was just going to rush in, and it was systematic and planned out. And so to find out over time that in fact he had been a police officer, and so had very special training, was not overly surprising to me. I have obviously, I mean, I think I said to the reporter I spoke to yesterday, I wish I could spend an hour talking to this guy because I have a lot of questions about his childhood that I'm really interested to learn more about. But obviously, first and foremost, this thing that we talk about all the time, that is having special training and knowing that you're someone who, in this kind of situation, you have the ability, you know what to do. You could you could see it on the video.
Yeah, yeah. The training really struck me as well. Stuck out, but struck me with the lifeguards that were on duty, but also images which thankfully had not been too well spread around of the beach in the aftermath. Most of the people providing first aid were not police or lifeguards or ambulance. And so that's that special training, again, that we've talked about. The first aid training is something that's accessible to all of us. It's very unlikely you live in a community where you can't get first aid training. And so knowing what to do in that situation is what allows you to do the thing. And it's absolutely a barrier to action to not have that preparation. So if you don't know what to do with a severe bleeding wound, you're not going to be able to help. And the lifeguards. I mean, I saw footage this morning of one of them had lined up their buggy and a huge line of people behind it, being protected by the gunfire. But more startlingly, one of the lifeguards paddling out to rescue someone. So this guy's got his eyes on the water for swimmers in distress while there is gunfire coming from the other direction, literally behind him. And he got on his board and paddled out to go and rescue someone. That insane. That training and duty is really extraordinary.
Yeah. And, I mean, to that point, when we were talking a few minutes ago about, the case of the United States, as a result of everything that goes on here, there are actually even more opportunities to take the kinds of classes that you're talking about, whether it's CPR, specific stop the bleed trainings, all of those things are increasingly available in ways that previously, like, it hadn't come across my radar, but now within the last um, 5 to 10 years, much more common. And so these are incredibly low cost, or perhaps no cost at all, other than your time, ways in which you can prepare yourself to be the person who steps up and saves lives. And the consequence of not taking that 1 hour, 2 hour course is standing by, being frozen in place, not certain what to do, or knowing that, in this situation, it's just that you're not sure. You don't know what you could do to be helpful. You think maybe, well, I'll just be in the way of someone who actually does know. These are the much more common responses. So the fact that these kinds of classes are regularly offered, really, people ought to be availing themselves of these opportunities, making sure that they know, even just the most basic life-saving techniques. I really can't stress enough how important it is. We saw this in this case just so many times. There were people who clearly had that, in their toolkit, and felt like, this is something I can do. This is a way I can help. Even as shootings were, people were still being shot and people were being helpful. And I think that that's a huge difference maker.
Yeah, and I think we've equated hero training with first aid training a lot in the past, in that most people agree it would be useful, but they don't agree strongly enough to go and actually get the training. I wonder, in situations like this, if there's a rush on registering for first aid trainings in the same way that there was to donate blood. I mean, the very viral footage of people lining up to donate blood, and the website crashing and things like that. I wonder if there's also an uptick in signing up for first aid classes. because of that very clear evidence of how useful it is. Because the police were trying to address the guns. They couldn't get out to go and help. Yeah, and I think there's other pieces in the preparation here too, with being in uniform, whether that's police or lifeguard. Um, there's a I don't know if you must get it over there, some reality TV show about Bondi lifeguards or something. So there is a sense of celebrity and reinforcement of doing the right thing about or for all these people that are in the space. I think there's the other thing that has struck me getting away from training a bit is this sense that it was the Australian thing to do to help, even coming from not not born in Australian people. One of the first people I saw interviewed was a French guy, and he was just, this isn't the Australian way. Helping is what we do. I saw an interview with Amandeep yesterday, who's the I think Indian-born New Zealander, and he, despite a general hatred of each other, New Zealanders and Australians actually see a lot of things in common. And his commentary was very, very much, this is what we do. This is how we are as a nation. But also was just so, I didn't realize he was a Kiwi when I was reading his reports, but he was the one that said he was on the shooter who was bleeding out, and he said, the blood didn't make me sick, but I had just slammed a kebab and some spicy sauce and ran down the hill, so I was feeling pretty rotten after that. But in the interview, he said he was pretty glad that he'd smashed a couple of beers before he got there as well. Just it's so very Australian to be that casual about something that's happened as well. And I think he was clearly struggling, and he was talking about already seeing a therapist. But this sort of Australianness has really come out as a common thread, even from, or maybe especially from, non-Australians. That's been an interesting sort of almost cultural expectation that you help.
Well, I want to kind of pick your brain about this a little bit because you're a good person to ask, and so I'll ask you, where does this come from? Right? Where is this notion that Australians all pitch in and help one another out and so on? Where is this coming from? Is this like something that you grew up with? Is this like a deep part of what it means to be Australian?
Yeah, very much. And there's a lot of components to Australianness, I suppose. There's the convict history that a lot of, or every American reminded me of in every conversation I had with them. My brother's on the call too. I think he can throw in some ideas if he has any. But there's a sense of being small but mighty. We're perennial underdogs. I think we might be the second best swimming nation in the world, with a population of smaller than most. It goes to cricket, where I started. There's no greater feeling than beating the English at any sport, but cricket especially. So there's very much an underdog, and we are overachievers in the world. And that's not just sport. It's when there's an Australian in Hollywood, there's just immense pride. And I think the other big one that really sort of sealed Australia's otherness from Britain was the World War One. Mostly the failed attack on Gallipoli, that Australians were just having to care for each other, being put into sprays of bullets by the English for no actual reason, and making big English mistakes in the organization of that attack. But one of the characters out of that was a guy and his donkey who was going out in danger to go and grab injured or dead soldiers and bringing them back. So that that mateship narrative arrived then. So that's just over 100 years ago. And there is an idea that we help each other. Now, in practice, are we selfish isolationists on a regular basis? Absolutely. Do we vote for political parties that are just benefiting us on one item? For sure. But I think broadly, that's where it comes from. We're small but mighty, and um, some iconic history of helping.
So I want to push on this a little bit more, because obviously, like, national narratives matter, and the way that people think about themselves is going to have an impact on how they act. So how is this transmitted? Right. In other words, is this something you're getting in school? This sense of what Australianness is this coming from is this coming from politicians? Is this like, somehow in the local communities? Like, how is this message delivered to people such that people clearly seem to have picked up on it, including relatively recent immigrants?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there. Definitely there's politicians who push it, and probably for the wrong reasons, and the right reasons. It depends on what they're trying to move through, I suppose. I live in a town, you've been here, of 2,000 people. There's one traffic light, but it's a pedestrian light, so it's not even for traffic. Um, there's the main piece of the town, I can see it if I do this, is a cenotaph, which is a statue in the middle of the town, remembering fallen soldiers. So that's something that is across the nation. There's a real memory of that time where we went to go and help the world, because World War One was as far away from Australia as you can get, basically. Um, it shows up in our TV, and certainly in sport. I mean, there's the national identity around our overachievement in sport is, it's very hard to get away from. But it does go into science as well. If we there's a book, I'm sure, of all the Australian inventions that have changed the world. Like, there's that kind of, like, remember us down here. We're the I think Jesse just said we're perennial overachievers. But the mateship is broadly spread as well. And I remember, I didn't watch this, but the first season of Australian Survivor here was essentially ruined because they all just wanted to take care of each other. No one would backstab anyone because we agreed we're mates. We're not going to do that. So I think it's definitely a cultural, and Jesse's just said it passes down from generation to generation for sure. That I had a conversation here yesterday as well, that this country is run on volunteers. There are volunteer organizations that are very central to the operation of towns, especially like this one, but bigger towns as well. I know things like Rotary exist in the US, but in Australia, they're very much doing stuff. They're in the community, they're providing, they're fundraising. But our firefighters here are all volunteer. And you would have seen the fires that we get so regularly. Those firefighters are volunteers that are going out there and risking their lives for the community. And they're part of the community. They have regular meetings, trainings. So that volunteer membership is really big here too. And just said the SES too, which is what is that, Jesse? State Emergency Service, I think. So they're the sort of first call during storms to go and open up roads to. And I don't yeah, I mean, the people are doing those jobs in the US, but I think a lot of them are paid.
Yeah, I mean, depends in some ways on the community, right? So there's still, of course, volunteer firefighters and so on, especially in more remote places, more rural places, smaller towns, that kind of thing. But interestingly, right, one of the big things about America, you can read Tocqueville's Democracy in America, right, was voluntary associations, and so the dwindling of those voluntary associations, the dwindling of civic participation, volunteerism, just joining groups and clubs. This is the thesis of Bob Putnam's book Bowling Alone from late 90s, early 2000s. And you can see the implications, over time, since that started being discussed. I don't want to herald the collapse of civic institutions, but um, you know, uh, there you have it. The last question I kind of want to ask you about this Australianness is, um, you know, uh, who does it include, right? Or
Yeah.
or who doesn't it include, right? Are all Australians equally Australian? And do we help one another um, across the board, irrespective of difference, because Australianness somehow trumps everything? Or is there a more complicated story there? I don't know the answer. I'm interested.
It's a more complicated story, but I think it in theory it includes everyone, and I think it, that mirrors the in theory of people would say they would act heroically. So people would say, yes, this includes everyone. In practice, it's different, and we have, Rupert Murdoch was from here, so we have all the hatred stoking that any of the other Murdoch tainted countries have. So there's lots of opportunities for people to demonize or villainize groups. But I think that's the testimony from people at Bondi um, suggests that that people get it and feel it pretty strongly. Um, Unquestionably, there are groups here who have been um, for centuries in bad shape, and there's been waves of immigration over each decade or small period of time since I've been alive, where there's been a group coming from somewhere that is the bad group. They're um, changing our culture, but like the UK, especially, some of our iconic foods are from overseas. Like they didn't want them at the start, but now they're Australian. Think of um, chicken tikka masala in the UK. It's completely fabricated for that culture, but it's their cultural dish. Um, so yeah, I think in spirit people get that and idealize that, but in practice it's not always spread evenly.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, I think that this is always going to be true of any minority group. Certainly, in this case, obviously, the Jewish community in Australia has a long history. They're not new to the country, but certainly, questions of anti-Semitism have come up in Australia over the last. Uh, uh, 2.5 years or so, in the same way that they have everywhere all over the world. Uh, and so it is interesting, to hear the rhetoric is all correct, in the aftermath of a terrible, terrible event, right? Which is we're all together, we're all one people, we're all Australians, and our common, right? Everyone, the number of people who have talked about our common humanity in the last several days is very high. Um, but I think that what we've seen all over the world is that the our common humanity talk always comes after something terrible happens. And we're not, we can't, we're not relying on enough our common humanity prior to bad things happening.
Yeah.
Where it's very easy to denigrate the other, to demonize the other, to blame and to point fingers, and then you know the question ultimately is, how do we encourage, or how do we do more to build that empathy across communities, so that everybody in Sydney, everybody in in Nebraska, everybody, we really are all rowing in the same direction, whatever our differences might be. We know one another, we recognize one another as neighbors. We might have different opinions. We might you might be a neighbor with an opinion I hate, but that doesn't make you less of my neighbor. That's the way, of course, that we'll end up seeing fewer of these terrible events in the future. Not so much the our common humanity talk afterward. I don't pretend to have any good answer, other than the things that you've been writing about on this Substack, and that I've been teaching about all semester, with regard to building empathy. But it seems to me that that is, we talked a lot about training and stop the bleed and CPR and lifeguarding and so on. But the last thing, because we don't want to go on forever here, but the last thing we really have to talk about is empathy. It seems to me that more empathy building on the front end before something bad happens is, first of all, um, a building block for heroic behavior. But second of all, it's a building block for fewer horrible things happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And to close on empathy, I might be able to bring in the other thing I wanted to talk about, which is I think I saw this morning 5 women who ran to help kids that weren't their own. And I think there's something very um, biological and cultural there, that it is empathy. These are someone's kids, and everyone's rallied around Matilda, who was the 10-year-old, the youngest victim. Another the story there is that the Ukrainian parents named her Matilda because it was the most Australian name they could think of. And there's footage of her dancing to Waltzing Matilda, our sort of de facto national anthem. But I think that you could maybe see some gendered reactions in those heroic behaviors. There was the grab that kid and protect them, and then there was running at a gunman. And I think, yeah, I think the last thing for me, I can understand the violence that was unleashed on the bridge once the shooters were down, but the restraint that Ahmed showed at that first iconic scene is even more remarkable when you see the lack of restraint from people going in to kick prone people, to just wanting to put violence onto these men who had unleashed violence. Again, I completely understand that and could not rule myself out for doing that. But yeah, his restraint was just, was remarkable and should be lauded, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I have to assume that's training. Because if you're trained, I mean, ideally, if you're trained as a police officer, you're trained to disarm and then not to just extrajudicially execute someone,
Yep.
right? And so once again, like I have to say that is another great example of someone's training kicking in and leading to the right behavior. Um, the Yeah, I mean, I think that there's certainly something to this, as a parent, seeing children whose parents are not there to protect them. It it really almost certainly leads someone to that immediate personal identification, and to one hopes to go do something about it. I think we saw that, in this case several times. And so, we have to just keep doing the work, I think, to build those build those opportunities for people to recognize the ways in which we are connected. We're never going to be, you're never going to find yourself in a situation where the person that needs your help is exactly like you, right? Or exactly like your kid or your mom. Um, but we have to find ways to play up the commonalities that we all have, such that when you see someone else's kid, you immediately think of your own. When you see someone who, you know, needs the assistance, and you say, well, you don't want to find yourself saying, oh, I don't know if this person's anything like me. I can't see any connection, because so often in this situation really, really emphasizes it. These actions were immediate. This was not like this is, you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. And I think that the people who were already in a position of safety, but who then went back, to go and help someone else. That is a decision that has to be made, long before it's this immediate situation. Because in the immediate situation, everything is telling you, all of the all of the deck, the whole deck is stacked against you going and doing something.
Yeah.
Um, and so the more work that can be done in advance, the more we can really emphasize how these actions benefit other people, benefit our communities, how it is what's in us, right? We all want to be the helper. Nobody wants to be the person running in the other direction, and hoping somebody else will take care of it. I mean, at least not the next day, right? You might want to be in that moment, but not the next day. And the more work we can do in advance to build people up so that they are capable of doing these things, if the horrible situation ever confronts them, uh, I think, again, the less likely those horrible situations are to take place in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And I guess I'd finish with a shout out to Bondi as a community, because I think that played a big part. It's a place with wide open space that people regularly bump into each other. There were clearly people from all over the world either visiting or living there, who get along, and they make this place um, work. And I guess I can extend that to the whole of Australia, but I don't want to go away from the focus on Bondi and the reactions there, because those people were at that time Bondi. And I think that's those communities where people are outside talking to each other, leaving their homes, not lionizing the idea of being at home by yourself under a blanket, really getting out and engaging in your community is only going to help in emergency situations, and the general fabric of society.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well said. I really appreciate you putting this together. I know this is difficult. It's a difficult thing to talk about, especially because it's immediate in some ways for both of us, and immediate in that it's. I mean, we're still dealing with it, right? It's not past, it's not history. So I'm glad we were able to come together and discuss, and I'm glad for all the comments too. Thank you for people who are watching and participating, and hopefully we'll continue to do these into the new year, Matt.
Indeed, I think there's going to be a lot of video in the coming year.
Super. Pivot to
All right.
video.
Yep.
Well, it's
Okay.
as always, it's good to see you and good to talk with you. And again, my thoughts are with everybody there, and really grateful that there were so many people who did step up. And as awful, as horrific as the event was, and as damaging, everyone knows it could have been so much worse. And so I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk about this, and I'm glad for the Australianness that we saw at play here.
Indeed. All right. Thanks, and thanks everyone.
Take care.